Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's How Game of Thrones Will End update for 2015. So about a year ago, I did a video where I gave my predictions on how I thought the Game of Thrones TV show and the Song of Ice and Fire novels would ultimately end. Well, since that time, we got Season 5 of the show, and I had more time to think about and revise my theories, so this video is my updated theories on how I think Game of Thrones will ultimately end. It is not completely necessary to have seen my first video to watch this one, but I will talk about it a lot, so it will help. I'll put a link in the description below for that video. First of all, I want to talk about some of the responses I got on that video, which has been, by a very large margin, my most popular video. At the time of making this video, that video has over 170,000 views. I totally wasn't expecting it to become that popular at the time I made it. I expected it to be just as popular as my other videos, which would get around like 1,000 or 2,000 views. As such, I just did it as a fun little exercise, and although I did seriously think about my theories, I didn't spend months planning for it or anything, and it wasn't intended as a master theory video. I was just spouting off what was on my mind, really. So I thought I'd give it another pass now that I've had more time to think about it. To be perfectly honest, sometimes I put more effort into videos that only get like 100 views, so it can be a bit frustrating for me, but whatever. People like what they like, and apparently for some reason they love theory videos. Now I want to address some of the comments I received on that video. I want to make it clear I'm not addressing the trolls. Any trolling comments were deleted before I even read them, and I haven't given them a second thought. Now, I want to address those who may have agreed or disagreed with my theories, and just because someone disagrees doesn't make them a troll. You're allowed to disagree with my opinion and express opinions of your own. In fact, that's one of the best things about making these videos, is hearing everyone's different take on things. So with this video, the commenters couldn't seem to agree on anything. Opinions seemed to be split on pretty much everything. For every person who said my theories were complete nonsense and the worst thing they've ever heard, there was an equal amount of people saying they loved my theories and it was the best thing they've ever heard. But what I found most interesting was the two very different extremes of comments. One side saying my theories were too optimistic and another side saying my theories were too pessimistic. Some people thought I was looking at Game of Thrones with rose-colored glasses and didn't appreciate how dark George R.R. Martin is, and others felt I was the one being dark, as I predicted practically everyone would die. And I have to say, from these two points of view, I agree a lot more with those who say my theories were too pessimistic, and I completely disagree with those who felt my theories were too optimistic. Looking back on it, if anything, I went too dark and would lighten up on it a little bit. Someone wrote a blog about my video and had some good things to say about it, but criticized the theories for being too close to The Lord of the Rings. However, recently Martin said in an interview that the ending of A Song of Ice and Fire will be similar to The Lord of the Rings, so take that! Now, I'm not saying that means my theories on how it will be similar to Lord of the Rings are correct. However, it does mean that that particular argument is not a very strong one. Getting back to the pessimistic thing, since Martin said that, I was thinking a lot about how the Lord of the Rings ended, and how it ended was the good guys were successful. They defeated evil, set everything right in the world to create a bright future, but there were some drawbacks to this, such as when Frodo and the hobbits returned to the Shire, they found their homes had been ravaged by war and turned into a dark, desolate place, and Frodo never recovered from his experiences and had to go off with Gandalf to the Undying Lands, which by all accounts was a metaphor for death. So it was a bittersweet ending, and Martin said that the Song of Ice and Fire ending would also be bittersweet in the same manner. So I think some people get carried away with like Ned dying and the Red Wedding and stuff like that, thinking everyone always dies and there's never any payoff in Game of Thrones and no one ever gets their way, which is why some may have felt my theories were too optimistic. But that's not true. It's not like George is a psychotic serial killer who just loves killing off his most beloved characters, and more of, he models it after history and makes it a bit more realistic, where there are a lot of factors that could affect things, and it isn't as simple as the good guys always winning, but that doesn't mean they always lose either. In particular, some felt my theories on Jon, Dany, and Tyrion riding dragons and fighting the White Walkers were too optimistic, and while I'll say it is a bit fanboyish, I still firmly believe it will happen, and it's not too optimistic. Just because that would happen doesn't mean it has to be all happy. It could happen in a typical dark, complex George R.R. Martin way. And there's Arya. My predictions for her were probably the ones I got the most comments about that strongly disagreed with me, which I find kind of funny considering they are the single prediction in the entire video I feel most strongly about. So I want to double down, no, triple down, scratch that, quadruple down on my predictions for Arya and say if I were only to get one prediction right, out of all the predictions I'd made, I'd put all my money on my Arya predictions. And what I said for her is that she would become this dark, badass assassin who would be trained by the Faceless Men, but eventually would leave them, go off to kill for her own purposes, and she would kill people like Walder Frey to help House Stark, but would never go home again, and would either die or just disappear somewhere and become the stuff of legends. I'm now leaning way more towards her just vanishing rather than dying. She'll become so dark and lose all sense of self and fade into legend. I am very, very strongly against theories that suggest she'll see the error of her ways and become a sweet girl again, or reconnect with her family, or anything like that. This whole time they've been building her as someone who keeps getting darker and darker, and have implied that she will become very dark and death will surround her. In the books, the Ghost of Highheart says this when she meets Arya. I see you, wolf child, blood child. I thought it was the Lord who smelled of death. You are cruel to come to my hill, cruel! I gorged on my grief at Summerhall. I need none of yours. Begone from here, Darkheart, begone! And in the show, Melisandre said this when she met Arya. I see a darkness in you, and in that darkness, eyes staring back at me. Brown eyes, blue eyes, green eyes, eyes you'll shut forever. So both the books and the show foreshadowed Arya's dark future. In fact, I say the show went out of their way to ensure this foreshadowing stayed in the show, since they didn't have the Ghost of Highheart in the show. They had to use Melisandre as a surrogate for her to ensure Arya's dark future was prophesized. In fact, a discussion video I did with Don Willie, he talked about how Arya may become a new person known as Darkheart, taking the name given to her by the Ghost of Highheart, and I think that is a distinct possibility. Also, I'd recommend checking out that discussion that we did of how Game of Thrones will end, which is over on Don Willie's channel, which is also a good quality channel that does a lot of character profiles. I'd recommend checking that out, so I'll put a link in the description below. Also with Arya, she had witnessed so much tragedy and experienced so much trauma, first by witnessing the presumed death of her teacher Syrio Forel, and seeing all those who served her house slaughtered in the streets, then seeing her father beheaded, then seeing her friends like Lami and Yoren killed, and then witnessing the torture and horror of Harrenhal, and then being right there when her mother and brother are killed and the entire Stark army are just slaughtered, and having to spend a lot of time with the shady fellow like the Hound, and then going out to become a trained assassin. That kind of trauma has a lasting, serious effect on someone, especially someone that young, and I believe there is no coming back from this from her. Now, in my first video, I did say that I thought she'd be the Valonqar, the one to kill Cersei, and I have completely backed away from that theory. I no longer think that will be the case. I think the Valonqar will be Jaime, who is the more likely candidate, but if you noticed, the show omitted the Valonqar prophecy, so isn't bound by the same guidelines. So I think it's still possible Arya might kill Cersei in the show, but not in the books. Getting back to the too optimistic things, some felt that Arya getting revenge on those who wronged her is too optimistic for George R.R. Martin, and I couldn't possibly disagree more, because she's already done this. This has already happened. In the book, she got her revenge on the Tickler and Wrath the Sweetling, and in the show, it was Polliver and Meryn Trant. In fact, I think that Meryn Trant scene, which was brutal and horrible, and many were comparing it to a Tarantino film, is a good indicator of what lies ahead for good old Arya. And for those saying it would be un-George R. R. Martin-like, I'd say you've already been proven wrong on that account. Plus, the overall predictions I made for her aren't optimistic. They involve her becoming a bloody assassin. Yes, she defeats the bad guys and gets her revenge, but she also loses all sense of self and goes into a really dark place, kind of like Frodo in Lord of the Rings, making this prediction exactly the type of bittersweet ending Martin was talking about. So, the other prediction I made that probably got the most disagreement was my prediction that Sansa would be the one to sit on the Iron Throne at the end of everything. Although this is another case where I got just as much, if not more, agreement than disagreement, but still had a lot of commenters who were very vocal about their disagreement on this prediction. However, I'm still holding to this Sansa prediction. In fact, in the original video I gave two possible outcomes, one being there is no Iron Throne, and the other that Sansa will sit on the Iron Throne. I have since abandoned the first one and melded it into my Sansa prediction, in so much as there will be no Iron Throne. However, Sansa will be the Queen of Westeros, which I'll get more into momentarily. The other thing I've completely changed my mind about is how Sansa will become the Queen of Westeros. I base my predictions on how Sansa will become Queen after history and believe she will be modeled after Queen Elizabeth Tudor, who was seen as one of the greatest rulers of England and a noted historical figure. However, I modeled how she would get to the throne after Elizabeth Tudor's grandmother, Elizabeth of York, who became queen by marrying Henry VII of House Lancaster, thus uniting the Lancasters and the Yorks and ending the War of the Roses, in which A Song of Ice and Fire draws a lot of inspiration from. I predicted that Sansa would resume her marriage to Tyrion and he would become king, and thus would unite the Starks and the Lannisters together, and the Tyrion would die and she would inherit the throne. So there are several problems with this, however. As one of my commenters pointed out, no one would ever allow Tyrion to become king of Westeros. And as another commenter pointed out, she would not inherit the throne in such a way, as wives do not inherit the throne through their deceased husbands, even in Dornish rules that allow women to rule. Assuming Dornish rules are in effect, the throne will go to the eldest child regardless of gender, not the wife. The best Sansa would hope for is if she had a child with Tyrion that was too young to rule, she could rule as Queen Regent until he or she came of age, which isn't what I think will happen. That and many other reasons made me change my mind on that as well, and I have revised my theory on how she will get to the throne. Also, I saw another YouTube video from a channel called Game of Thrones Academy, which if you haven't checked out, I'd highly recommend that. I'll put a link for that in the description below, where these history buffs compare Game of Thrones to history and make some predictions based off of historic events. Anyway, they know a hell of a lot more about history than I do, so when they made a video also predicting Sansa would become Queen of Westeros based off of Queen Elizabeth Tudor, I felt vindicated. However, they came to it from a completely different direction than I did, but that's all good. I'm just glad someone who actually knows what they're talking about agrees with me. So my new combined theory on what will happen is that all these forces will converge on King's Landing and it will be destroyed from the inside. The Tyrells and the Lannisters will feud and be driving towards war. Meanwhile, the Faith Militant will rise up and attempt to seize control, while external forces will converge on King's Landing like the Ironborn and the Dornish, and in the books, young Griff's forces, and in the show, Daenerys. Just a point of clarification, I don't think Daenerys will be there in the books for this huge clusterfuck and will arrive after this is over, whereas in the show I think she'll replace young Griff's forces and will be there, as she will get to Westeros much earlier in the show. At any rate, all of these forces will converge on King's Landing. It will be a total mess. The Red Keep will be in utter ruin. Many of the old Targaryen artifacts will purposely be destroyed by the Faith Militant, and just the whole city will be obliterated. Many people will die, like Tommen, Olenna, Loras, Mace Tyrell, Euron Greyjoy, young Griff, Aerion Martell, the High Sparrow. It's just going to be a complete and total mess. I'm predicting this will happen either at the end of The Winds of Winter or at the start of A Dream of Spring in the novels, and in the show it will happen in Season 7, which will mostly be what Season 7 will be about. And then the majority of A Dream of Spring and Season 8 will be dealing with the aftermath, with anyone bearing any resemblance to inheriting the throne being dead, i.e. Stannis, Tommen, and Myrcella, and most other people who are vying for power being killed in this catastrophe. Westeros, or what's left of it, will decide to go back to Targaryen rule. And by Targaryen rule, I mean Daenerys Targaryen, Jon Targaryen, and Tyrion Targaryen. Yes, I'm sticking with my good old Tyrion Targaryen theory. Anyway, Daenerys will be the Queen of Westeros, ruling with her nephew and half-brother, and be the 3 dragon riders. The 3 of them will mirror King Aegon and his 2 sister wives of Aegon's conquest, and many will see it as an omen or prophecy fulfilled. However, they will set up a new capital somewhere in the northern Riverlands, still somewhat central to Westeros, but closer to the north, to deal with the real threat of the White Walkers, who are at this point had already either brought down or circumvented the wall and are wreaking havoc in the north. By this time, Jon would have learned of his true heritage and would come down to elicit the help of his aunt and uncle Daenerys and Tyrion, who are already allied. And with the help of a few reasonable voices and some maneuvering by Varys, they will unite the 7 kingdoms against the White Walker threat. The 3 Targaryens won't remain in their new capital long and will quickly go north to battle the White Walkers. They will have formed a new council to which Sansa will be the temporary leader. At this stage, Rickon has already claimed leadership of the North, and Sansa would be his emissary in the capital, and she will in fact resume her marriage to Tyrion, even in the show, because her husband Ramsay will be dead by this point, and she will also be the cousin of another ruling member of House Targaryen. As I originally said, Jon, Daenerys, and Tyrion will not return from their battle. They will defeat the White Walkers, but in doing so will either die or simply not return. And with no true Targaryen heir, the council will declare Sansa, the temporary leader, as the permanent queen of Westeros, and she will oversee the restoration of Westeros and the 7 kingdoms, and will usher in a rebirth, a renaissance, if you will, of life in Westeros that will thrive. Sansa, like Queen Elizabeth, will be a sort of a virgin queen, even though in the show she's no longer a virgin and would be twice widowed. However, she will be a virgin queen in the sense that she will rule without a king and will never remarry and will stay the sole ruler of Westeros for the rest of her life. And of course, this will be a brand new Westeros that will set many new rules and traditions, and of course, doing away with the rule that only males can be a ruler of Westeros. So yeah, those are my predictions for Sansa. As far as Tyrion, Daenerys, Jon, and their fight against the White Walkers goes, this will be the main focus of the final book/season. George R.R. Martin has talked before about how the characters started bunched together at the beginning, and over the course of the series would branch out, and said towards the end they will start to become back together again, and had noted a consolidation. So I think the final novel/season will be a lot more focused on the fighting in the north against the White Walkers, which could possibly even spill over into the south a bit. Bran will be a huge factor in defeating the White Walkers with his warging abilities, and will be instrumental in helping the Targaryens defeat them, and yes, he will warg into a dragon. However, like the Lord of the Rings, where the villain is defeated and orders returned to the world, it will be a costly victory. Daenerys and her dragons will die, but Tyrion will be the first to fall. I'm kind of borrowing this next part from my brother Apkin Tomko, who has done several of his own How Game of Thrones Will End videos, which I'll put links to in the description below because they're also really worth checking out. But I agree with his theory that the White Walkers aren't completely evil, and there will be a truce that needs to be made, and Jon will have to permanently go with the White Walkers to satisfy this truth. You know, this isn't exactly what Apkin Tomko said. His theories were a bit different but similar. So if you want to hear his full theories, go check out his videos. But yeah, I think it will pretty much go down like that. Bran will not die, but he'll be stuck in the north under the weirwood tree and never be able to move from there again, but will look over people via his green sight and warging. And the thing I said in my original video about magic leaving the world being similar to Lord of the Rings, I'm sticking to that. However, the White Walkers won't be killed off, but will retreat back to the lands of Always Winter and effectively will leave the world. And the dragons will die. So yes, a very bittersweet ending. Sansa will oversee a new, better Westeros, but Jon will have to go with the White Walkers to satisfy the treaty. Tyrion and Daenerys will die, Bran will be stuck under a tree, and Arya will disappear as a legendary assassin. Sounds about bittersweet to me. So just to cover a few other peoples and groups, as I mentioned about the Night's Watch, they will pretty much be wiped out by the White Walker invasion because they will go to shit after they have killed Jon Snow. I also said they would be reformed, but someone in the comments asked me if the White Walkers were gone, why reform the Night's Watch? And that's a good question. Integrating this into my new theory, I'd say they reform the Night's Watch in order to ensure the treaty stays intact, whatever this treaty may be. However, in my previous video, I said Theon will become the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. I've changed my mind on that one. I think Theon will go back to the Iron Islands and be a part of the ruling family there. I think Davos will be the new Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, as during the battle he would have worked closely with Jon Snow, and he will help to reform the new Night's Watch with, of course, the help of Samwell Tarly as the head maester. As for Jorah, I said in my last video he would commit suicide after Daenerys' death. I've changed my mind on that one. I think that's a bit out there. Plus, given what's happened to him in the TV show, I'm now going to have to go with death. He's got grayscale, so he's going to die. Now, obviously, the same thing's not going to happen to him in the books, but I think if he's going to die in the show, he's probably going to die in the books too. He might be around longer in the books, he might survive until the final battle with the White Walkers, but in the show, he'll die in the clusterfuck at King's Landing, and will add another element to the clusterfuck, an outbreak of grayscale. Now, in the books, it's Jon Connington, so I think Jorah will fill that role in the show, but I have to believe that the grayscale is going to be a factor because the show made a point of keeping that storyline even though Jon Connington was cut. So in the show, I think Jorah will make it to Westeros without anyone knowing about his grayscale, and it will become a factor at the Battle of King's Landing, and I think the grayscale will decimate King's Landing, and what little stands of it after the battle will be a new grayscale type colony that people will stay away from. I think this is what will destroy the Faith Militant, because most of them will be in King's Landing and will die from grayscale, and the rest of the sparrows around Westeros will take this as an omen that the gods weren't with them, and so the movement will fall apart. Now, someone noticed I didn't mention Jaime in my last video. That's because I'm a bit uncertain of what's going down with Jaime and Brienne. In fact, because of this uncertainty, I won't really touch on Brienne that much. I'd say by the end she becomes the Lord Commander of Sansa's Queen's Guard, but what happens in the interim I have no idea. As for Jaime, I alluded to earlier, I believe he will be the one to kill Cersei. At some point, Kevin will banish her to Castle Rock so she won't be in King's Landing when the clusterfuck happens, and after hearing about her son's death, thus fulfilling the prophecy of her children dying, she'll start to go a bit insane. She'll desperately work to fight against the reformation of the new Westeros with the Targaryens in charge, and will start to rile some shit up. Jaime will see this as causing nothing but disaster and will try to reason with her, but to no avail, and she will be beyond all reason, as she will now believe the younger, prettier queen to usurp her role is Daenerys, and will do everything in her power to kill her. In order to stop Westeros from slipping back into chaos, Jaime will kill her by wrapping his hands around her neck. Yes, even his golden hand, that still counts, goddammit. And he'll kill her. He will feel guilty about killing his sister/lover and will lose all ambition, but will stay on to serve as Lord of Casterly Rock and Warden of the West under Queen Sansa, whose rule he will respect. So quite a bittersweet ending for him as well. And thus, by the way, making Jaime the Valonqar and Sansa the younger, prettier queen that took all she held dear. So a couple other comments I got noticed I didn't mention Petyr Baelish, so let me get into him now. That clusterfuck I mentioned in King's Landing where all the forces merge, well, that will be mostly his doing. He will maneuver things and set shit in motion to have King's Landing wiped out, while he just hangs back with his Vale forces and watches the kingdom burn. As Varys once said, he'd see the country burn if it meant he could be king of the ashes, which is exactly what he tried to do, to use chaos as a ladder, have all these forces destroy themselves so he can just swoop in with his Vale forces who are untouched and try to become king. What will stop him? Sansa, of course. I'm not sure how yet, but she will outplot and outmaneuver him, and we'll see what he's up to and set things in motion that will lead to his death, so ultimately she will defeat him. Regarding Stannis, in my previous video I said he would defeat the Boltons and help Rickon take the north, but then die fighting the White Walkers. Well, after seeing what happened in Season 5, I kind of changed my mind about that one. Some commenters gave me credit for correctly predicting Stannis' death, but I was a bit off on the timeline. So Stannis died and was defeated by the Boltons in the show, and I think he too will die in the books. And yes, Stannis in the show is dead. This has been confirmed by like a million sources. I will delete any comment that attempts to argue with me about this, as I want nothing to do with your denial. And I do believe Stannis will also be defeated by the Boltons and die in the books as well, if he isn't dead already. As you recall, in the Pink Letter, it stated that Stannis was dead. Many people assumed it was lying, but perhaps not. Either way, Stannis isn't long for this world, and the North will be won another way, which I won't get into here as I'm saving that for my Season 6 prediction videos. Also, I just want to touch on the Tyrells, because when George R.R. Martin was asked which characters not in the show that he wished were in the show, he brought up the Tyrell siblings that were cut from the show. He said that he didn't just put them in there on a whim, that they have a purpose to serve. So I'm thinking that in the books, Olenna, Marjorie, Mace, and Loras all die at King's Landing, and so Willis will become the new head of House Tyrell and will be Warden of the Reach in the end, and Garland Tyrell will go off with the Targaryens and help fight against the White Walkers and will have a major role to play up there. So the show is going to have to compensate for this, I think, by having Loras survive, and then he'll fulfill both of these roles by helping the battle and then becoming Warden of the Reach. And a quick word about prophecies, because in my previous video I noticed I stated explicitly who would fit each prophecy, like this person would be Azor Ahai, or these people would be the three heads of the dragon. However, I've moved away from that whole way of thinking, as I don't think it will ever be explicitly stated in the show or the books who Azor Ahai is. If things go down as I predicted, one could infer Tyrion, Dany, and Jon were the three heads, and that one or all of them was Azor Ahai, or the Prince of Promise, but that will be a matter of debate and discussion and will not be spoon-fed to us. So that's about everything I wanted to cover. If there are characters and topics I didn't cover, it may be because I'm saving those for my Game of Thrones Season 6 prediction videos, a series I will start next week, as every Monday I will release a new video focused on a different character, where I will give my predictions on what I think will happen to that character in Season 6, and I'll be doing a new predictions video every Monday for the rest of the year. And those predictions will be similar to these ones in how much detail I go into. If not, I'll go into a bit more detail. And as for the predictions I made in this video, it's just fun to speculate. I'm just throwing shit out there and see what sticks. Most of this is just wild shots in the dark, so I'll be surprised if I get any of this right. So that's it for my How Game of Thrones Will End update video. Be sure to check out my channel for many more Game of Thrones videos. I've done reviews for every episode of Season 5, plus a lot of Season 5 wrap-up videos. I do a lot of Game of Thrones Top 10 videos, and commentary on Game of Thrones, and a Song of Ice and Fire, including some book-to-show comparison videos, and of course the upcoming Season 6 prediction videos, and more Season 6 coverage as we get closer to its release. So make sure you subscribe so you can keep up with all that. Thanks a lot for watching.